cover the cow-calf sector, and we are going to cover elements of these type of operations which can apply to the commercial industry as well as the seed stock industry. And so I always like to start a lecture with a quote that seems to capture the culture of the sector, and this one comes from Dr. Dave Daly, who not only was a professor at Chico State for many years, but also is a prominent cattleman in California. And so this quote has stuck with me since I was a student. And so he said that low-cost producers will survive in this system of competitive markets. And so we're going to focus a lot of our attention in this lecture on how producers can remain low-cost producers. So within the sector, in general, the cow-calf sector tends to be really capital intensive, but labor extensive, meaning that there's a lot of capital, a lot of dollars actually invested and moving from not necessarily operation to operation, but is moving through a profit and loss spreadsheet. And so, for example, we are getting ready to brand calves on our personal ranch right now, and we just spent $3,500 on vaccine for just the baby calves. And so and we're a smaller operation, so that's just an example of one minor piece of our animal health calendar and how expensive it can be. So there's lots of capital tied up in every single piece of this business. And labor tends to be very extensive in this sector because we are dealing with a mother cow. So it is unlike the stocker sector where we may only have cattle that we're responsible for 6 months out of the year. The cow-calf sector is where we actually have to manage and care for cows that are on an annual basis. And so if we look at a cow over her lifetime, we can have upwards of $3,000 invested in her, in just that one cow for her lifetime. So this is going to be really central knowledge to keep in mind as we proceed through this lecture, because ranches are actually measured in cow-calf units. And so a cow with a calf at her side is considered a unit. We also call them pairs or animal units. And so even if we have a smaller or a mid-sized operation of about 300 mother cows, that small mid-sized operation is going to bring in roughly $150,000 of sales per year. So again, lots of money actually invested in these animals. The cow-calf sector also operates off of break-evens, and so the break-even ranges between a high and a low-cost producer is anywhere from about $1.26 a pound clear down to 62 cents per pound. So there's quite a spread on producer profitability. And so some of the relationships that we see among different producers within this sector are that if we have, for example, a seed stock producer that has a high cost operation, they have a lot of inputs, they also have to have high production. So an example of that on the seed stock side would be a high cost operation, meaning that they have probably annual cow costs of around $500 to $700 per animal. And so they have these high costs because they are producing seed stock products. So they're producing bulls that are going to be sold to commercial cattlemen, or embryos to be transferred, or semen that is going to be shipped all around the world. And so those high inputs are then going to have to be combated with high levels of production. So this is why we see spring bull sales, like we're just coming out of the end of bull sale season in the spring, and you can pay anywhere between $3,000 and $10,000 for a single yearling bull right now. And so that is an example of a high cost, high input, high production operation. An example of a low cost, low input, low production operation would be a commercial cow-calf operation, whose annual cow costs may be around $400 to $450. They have very low inputs, so they are going to vaccinate those cows once a year. Feed is going to be the biggest percentage of the expenses associated with that female, and they are probably only going to work cows once, maybe twice a year. And so the production side of that is that calf that cow produces. And so those are just two examples of how in the cow-calf sector we can see producers that fall into a high-cost or a low-cost model. For producers that are going to be somewhere in the middle, that is kind of the optimal place to be. So whether you're a seed stock operator or in the commercial sector. So a producer that is in between the high and the low cost scenarios are going to be solid producers that are going to try to minimize costs as much as possible. And so some things to keep in mind to be a successful producer is you have to have some goals. So if you are a producer that has a low cost, high profit operation, then your operation is going to yield competitively priced, highly palatable beef products. And so some examples of some goals are over here to the left-hand side. And so, for example, you may want to be a producer that manages available resources for optimum productivity, but focusing on a combination of high and low cost resources. And you are going to maximize continuing net profit while reserving and improving the resource. And so this is where a lot of dual goals come into play for ranch owners. So if they're interested in not only making a profit off of their cow-calf operation, but also sustaining or improving the rangeland, that is two goals that you have to work very, very hard on to make them go hand in hand together. And so now we are in this culture, especially in California and the West, of absentee owners. So people that are not necessarily associated with any facet of agriculture, but are trying to shelter tax dollars by purchasing large ranches and then leasing those ranches out to cow-calf operators. And so usually the absentee owners don't always get involved in the management unless there's a problem or the check doesn't clear. And so, for example, I have a colleague that leases a ranch from a Taiwanese business or a Taiwanese lawyer who goes back and forth between LA and Taiwan. And he purchased a ranch in Butte County, and the person that is leasing that ranch has only met him 3 times. And they communicate over email mostly, and it's 2 to 3 times a year. And so as long as the check goes through and the Taiwanese lawyer can come up and do a little bit of hunting or a little bit of fishing, he is happy. And so a lot of those beef producers that have these absentee owners that kind of stay out of the day-to-day management, they actually have the ability to be fairly profitable. But again, those ranchers don't own the land, they're leasing the land. And so this has become normal, and especially in California. All right, so one other thing that you have to keep in mind to be a successful cow-calf operation, actually, to be a successful operation, no matter what sector of the industry you're actually working in, is to make sure you have a business plan. So the business plan model is going to contain these 6 things. So it's going to contain a calendar of events, a nutrition plan, a genetics or breeding program, a reproduction plan, a rangeland and pasture management plan, and a marketing plan. And so it's important that these things be kind of thought through and budgeted for, because many times if you go in to try to get a loan from a lending agency, no matter what you want to do, they're going to ask you for some sort of business plan. And to wrap up the end of this first section, we're going to talk about the top 5 ways that low-cost producers are able to reduce costs. And then in subsequent lectures, we're going to get into more detail about each one. And so the top 5 ways that low-cost producers can reduce costs is, first and foremost, they can reduce the amount of harvested and supplemental feed costs that they incur. So this means feeding less hay and less supplements. And so this is where producers that tend to be more profitable if they can graze year round. So that's why transportation is such a big part of the cow-calf sector in California and really the whole West Coast. Because we have the ability to take cattle to higher elevation mountain areas during the summer and the fall, and then gather them and ship them back to the valley or lower elevations in the winter and the spring. And so this allows that animal to utilize forage that is going to be produced naturally, and it limits producers from having to spend money on labor and purchase of hay products. Low-cost producers can also reduce costs by using rotational grazing. So there's a lot of different ways to rotationally graze on pastures if you have pastures available. Rotational grazing especially in our ecosystem, which is an annual grass ecosystem here in Central California, is really important for rest and recovery of the grasses. Additionally, low-cost producers need to use the right genetics for their environment. So we're going to talk a lot about fitting a cow to the environment in question. So this is utilizing Angus animals in North and South Dakota rather than Brahman animals, or utilizing eared cattle with Bos Indicus influence or eared cattle in the southern states to combat humidity, high temperatures, and pests. So using the right genetics becomes a really big way that producers can reduce costs. And then, of course, they need to reduce labor costs wherever they can. This is why a lot of folks that are ranchers tend to not think about labor cost. So they take free help and they try to make things like we're doing right now or this week pretty fun. So this is a branding for us this week. And so we have all of my cousins who are actually really good hands come and help gather and get everything processed so we can get it done in 2 days. And so it costs us a lot of money just in vaccine and supplies and that type of thing, but the labor part is free because we will again return the favor to our cousins as their brandings come up in the next month or two. And then finally, one of the best things a low-cost producer can do is implement a strong herd health program. And Dr. Graham talked about that last week.